So today, we're going to dive into the life of a man whose quiet dedication actually helped build the Catholic Church in America. We're talking about St. John Neumann. And, his story is one of humble service and just profound impact. And it all kicks off with a pretty surprising fact.
But first, let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered who the first male American citizen to be officially recognized as a saint was? Well, you might be surprised to hear that it's the very man we're talking about right now. Yep, his name was John Neumann. And really, if you had to boil his entire life down to just a few words, they would absolutely be humility and this unwavering, incredible dedication to serving others, especially the people who are often forgotten. Look, this was not a guy who was chasing fame or power, not at all. His life was really defined by this deep, internal prayer life and a special love for the Eucharist, which he saw as the source of all his strength. And he took that strength and just poured it into serving the most vulnerable people he could find. Immigrants who were just arriving in a new country, the poor who were often overlooked, and children who desperately needed an education.
So you might be asking, how does a guy from Bohemia end up becoming this foundational saint for the United States? Well, his whole journey kicked off because of a really interesting problem that honestly turned into a huge opportunity.
So, John Neumann was born way back in 1811 and felt this call to be a priest from a pretty young age. He did everything right. He completed all his studies, but when it was finally time for him to be ordained, he ran into this huge roadblock. There were just too many priests in his diocese. So what does he do? He makes this massive, life-changing decision in 1836 to leave everything and everyone he knew behind and sail to the United States. And get this, he was ordained almost the minute he arrived in New York.
I mean, look at this contrast. It's pretty stark, right? Back home in Bohemia, there was a surplus of priests, so much so that he couldn't even be ordained. But in America, the church was young, it was growing fast, and it was in desperate need of priests to serve this expanding community. He saw that need, and he didn't think twice about answering the call.
So when he gets to America, his work doesn't start in some big, fancy cathedral. Oh no, it began out on the rugged frontier, where he served as a missionary priest, and let me tell you, he faced some incredible challenges. I want you to just picture this for a second. He would travel for miles and miles, a lot of the time just on foot, through the wilderness of rural New York. Sometimes he'd get lost for days, all just to reach a few Catholic families scattered across the countryside. There were no churches out there, so he'd celebrate Mass in people's living rooms, in their barns, literally wherever they could find space. He was basically a one-man spiritual lifeline for so many people. Even with all this tireless work he was doing, Neumann felt like there was something more, a deeper calling. He wanted to be part of a community that was all about preaching the gospel to the poor. And that search led him to join the Redemptorists, a religious order with a special mission to serve those most in need. This decision really just solidified his ministry in serving the marginalized.
And this deep commitment to service, well, it led him to the biggest, most prominent chapter of his life. In 1852, this humble missionary priest was appointed the Bishop of Philadelphia, a role he apparently accepted with a ton of reluctance. But as bishop, he wasn't just some figurehead sitting in an office. No way. This guy was a builder. He oversaw the construction of dozens of new churches. He invited all these different religious orders to come work in the diocese. And maybe his biggest legacy of all, he founded the very first diocesan-wide Catholic school system in the entire country. He basically created the blueprint for everyone else to follow. Bishop Neumann didn't live a very long life, but the impact he made, it was absolutely immense. His legacy is proof that a life of quiet, persistent, humble dedication can create waves that last for centuries. He worked tirelessly, literally right up until the very end. On January 5th, 1860, he was just out running errands on a street in Philadelphia when he suddenly collapsed and died. It wasn't until over a century later, in 1977, that the Church officially recognized his incredible holiness, and Pope Paul VI canonized him as a saint. So, for anyone who's not familiar with this term, canonization, what is it? Basically, it's the Church's official way of saying that a person lived a life of heroic virtue, that they're in heaven, and that they're worthy of being looked up to as an example. It's pretty much the highest honor the Church can give to someone. When you look at everything, the story of St. John Neumann really boils down to this one powerful idea. His life teaches us that holiness isn't always about some grand, dramatic gesture. A lot of the time, it's found in the day-to-day commitment to serving others with humility, pushing through challenges, and just trusting in a plan that's bigger than your own. And that kind of brings us to a final thought, right? John Neumann found his calling by building schools and serving immigrants on the American frontier. It really makes you stop and think, what does that same spirit of humble service look like for us, right now, in our own communities, our workplaces, and our lives today?